Single dad Janitor left a mysterious note. What the CEO discovered nearly crashed a 200-millimeter deal. The first rays of Manhattan sunlight barely touched the skyline when Sienna Calvert stood frozen behind her mahogany desk on the 42nd floor of Calvert Equities. Right in front of her keyboard lay a yellow envelope, no label, no postage, no sender's mark. But it wasn't the envelope that sent a chill down her spine. It was what was inside. A printed copy of the upcoming merger agreement identical to the one she was set to present to the press that weekend. Except this one had 3 lines slashed in red ink. And next to clause 7.3, someone had handwritten in bold, deliberate script, "This clause is a trap. If you sign it, Calvert won't belong to you anymore." Her fingers clenched the edge of the paper. The page felt slightly damp, like it had been freshly printed only hours ago. But how no one else had access to this document. No one except she slammed the intercom button. "Seth, I want a full security review. Check the camera feeds on this floor, everything after 11 p.m. last night. I want to know who walked into this office." "Yes, ma'am. Right away." Within 10 minutes, the head of security returned with 2 compliance officers and a tablet. Sienna leaned in, watching the footage. A man in janitor overalls appeared on screen. He moved silently through the office, collecting trash-wiping surfaces. And then, with a glance toward the photo frame on her shelf, he gently placed the envelope on her desk and left. "Name?" she asked, without blinking. Evan Marlowe, the security chief, replied. "Night shift janitor since March. Keeps to himself. No red flags. Bring him up. Now." Evan entered the room with quiet composure. Lean, broad-shouldered hair peppered with gray, his eyes were sharp, the kind of eyes that belonged to a man who had been stepped on by life, but hadn't let it steal his spine. Sienna didn't waste time. "Why do you have this contract? Who gave you access to confidential materials?" Evan paused for a beat, then spoke calmly. "No one gave me access. I didn't need it to recognize when a company is about to be stolen." The room felt a few degrees colder. "I didn't ask for your opinion," she snapped. "I asked how you got your hands on this." "Have you ever checked the print queue on the second-floor copier?" he said, unfazed. "Sometimes people forget to pick up their test prints. What they think are mistakes often reveal more than what they try to keep hidden." He paused. "I read it, and I recognized the pattern. I've seen it before. Right before everything fell apart." Sienna's voice hardened. "And I'm supposed to take the word of a janitor." Evan smiled faintly. "I used to be a senior auditor at Whitaker & Cross. I warned them about the $370 million misstatement in 2017. No one listened. I lost everything." The name hit her like a stone. She knew Whitaker & Cross. She remembered the anonymous report circulated across Wall Street, a financial autopsy so precise it sent ripples through the industry. No one had ever claimed authorship. She stared at him now with new caution. "You have proof." "Not much," Evan admitted, "but enough to know that if you sign this, voting rights in Calvert will be funneled into an offshore trust. You'll no longer control who holds power here, who's behind it." Evan didn't flinch. The only person with the access and the influence to slip that clause in without raising red flags. Sienna's voice dropped. "Graham." Evan didn't nod. He didn't need to. "I'm not pointing fingers. I just don't want to see someone like you, sharp, capable, become the next casualty." Sienna turned away, her thoughts racing. Graham had been by her side for years, her COO, her trusted confidant, the one who pitched this merger like a golden ticket. She remembered saying to him not long ago, "I'm not afraid of losing money. I'm afraid of losing control." And he had laughed. "Then let me hold the wheel for a while." She turned back to Evan. "Go back to work. For now, I'm not firing you. But you are not to leave the building during your shift." "Wasn't planning on it," Evan replied. "Not yet. You just threw yourself into a storm." "Do you realize that I do?" he said simply. "But if I stay silent again, I'll have nothing left to teach my daughter. That stopped her. She looked at him, really looked. A man who once stood among the sharpest minds in finance, now reduced to mops and buckets, but with eyes that still saw the truth. A man with nothing left to lose, except his dignity. And somewhere deep in the silence that followed, something in her shifted. Not trust. Not yet. But the seed of a question. What if he's right? The lobby of Calvert Equities buzzed with muted chaos. The sleek glass walls gleamed under the morning sun, and polished shoes clicked across marble floors as executives in tailored suits passed by heads buried in phones and portfolios. But amid the rush, one man walked unnoticed, his pace, slow shoulders, a square uniform marked with the kind of humility that demanded no attention. Evan Marlowe pushed a janitor's cart past the espresso bar, the smell of roasted beans trailing him like a shadow. But today, the mop and cleaning spray were just camouflage. In his back pocket, folded like a letter from a war front, was a photocopy of the merger clause that had set everything into motion. He didn't glance at the executives. He didn't need to. He'd once walked in their shoes and learned the hard way how quickly those shoes could disappear beneath you. A security guard nodded at him. "Busy day, huh?" the guard offered. Evan gave a half smile. "Aren't they all, when someone's trying to sell the building from under your feet?" The guard blinked, uncertain whether to laugh. Evan just kept walking. Upstairs in the inner sanctum of the company, Sienna Calvert sat alone in the executive conference room, staring at a paused video on her tablet. It was grainy but clear enough, Evan placing the envelope. No hesitation, no rush. Like a man setting down a truth the world didn't want to read. She hadn't said a word since watching it. Not to Graham, not to legal, not even to her assistant. She tapped the screen again, this time playing a voice recording clipped from her own internal notes the night before. Clause 7.3 transfers indirect voting power to a Cayman shell. But the board still holds final say. Right, she had asked that out loud in her private notes, half rhetorical, half uncertain. But now, with Evan's warning, the question echoed louder. The door opened. Graham Voss stepped in his crisp gray suit, almost too perfect, like it had been sewn around a lie. "You wanted me," he said with his usual easy charm. Sienna didn't look up immediately. She closed the tablet slowly. "Yes, I need clarification on the ownership structures post-merger." He smiled as if she'd just asked about lunch reservations. "We went over that 2 weeks ago. You signed off on it." She raised her eyes. "Remind me again who drafted Clause 7.3. Graham hesitated for half a second. But Sienna caught it. That would have been legal. "Probably via the finance subcommittee," he said. "I want to see the original drafting log. I'll have someone send it over." She stood. Her voice was low but sharp. "Graham, has anything changed since we discussed the Silvergate merger?" His smile twitched. "Changed? How changed? In the sense that, if I sign that deal, am I still the one running?" "Calvert," Graham laughed, lightly, too lightly. "Of course, you're the face, the founder. This merger just scales what you've already built." But her eyes didn't blink. She wasn't asking for flattery. She was asking for truth. And Graham, for all his polished words, offered none. Later that evening, Evan returned to the janitor's closet, closing the door behind him like a man stepping into a confessional. He leaned against the wall and pulled out a notepad from under the cleaning supplies. Old habits died hard. He scribbled Clause 7.3, split vote. Voss, Secret, potential beneficiary. Need confirmation of trustee on Cayman arm. A tiny knock came at the door. Evan opened it cautiously. Maisie stood there, backpack half-zipped, holding a crumpled drawing in one hand and a chocolate chip cookie in the other. "I got bored in the break room," she said. "Miss Darlene said I could come find you." He smiled, kneeling to her level. "You should have stayed with her. Big people get weird when kids run around corporate hallways." Maisie handed him the drawing. It was a stick-figure family. Him. Her. And someone new, a woman in a blazer and high heels. The face was serious, but the smile was big. Is that supposed to be? Her Maisie interrupted. "The lady you talked to this morning. The one who looked scared but wouldn't admit it." Evan blinked. "You think she looked scared?" "Yeah," Maisie said, taking a bite of her cookie. "Like when I try to pretend I didn't break the vase, but I know Mom's gonna find out anyway." Evan didn't laugh. He couldn't. "She's the CEO," he said. "She doesn't scare easy." Maisie tilted her head. Maybe not at people, but maybe at herself. Back upstairs, Sienna watched the city lights blink to life beyond the glass. She hadn't turned on any lamps. Darkness helped her think. She remembered her mentor once told her, "Power is not about control. It's about knowing what you're willing to lose." And suddenly that sentence didn't just make sense. It ached. She whispered to herself, not expecting an answer. What am I willing to lose? Down in the garage, Evan closed the trunk of his beat-up sedan, tucked Maisie in, and paused before driving off. He looked at the tall building behind him. "I don't know if she'll listen," he said aloud, mostly to himself. From the back seat, Maisie's small voice piped up, muffled under her blanket. "You weren't trying to be heard. You were just trying to tell the truth, right?" Evan looked in the rearview mirror and gave a half smile. "That's the thing about truth, kiddo. It doesn't always shout, but it always echoes." And with that, he turned the key. The engine sputtered to life, and so did something else, a storm that had just begun to stir. The morning began with silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that sits heavy in the air before something breaks. Sienna Calvert stood in the elevator alone, watching the floor numbers light up one by one. Her reflection in the chrome doors looked too polished to put together. Only her eyes betrayed her tired alert and sharper than glass. As the doors opened onto the executive floor, she carried a tablet clutched against her chest like a shield. Her schedule was packed with meetings about the merger press previews, final board, sign-offs, risk mitigation. But all she could think about was Clause 7.3, and the man who had warned her. Down on the operations floor, Evan was back in his uniform, mop in hand, pushing quietly across the gleaming tile. He moved like he was invisible. And in many ways he was, except to the one person who now couldn't stop thinking about him. "Hey, Marlowe," a voice called. It was Doug from IT carrying a tray of coffee. Evan looked up surprised. "You dropped this," Doug said, holding up a folded piece of paper. It was Evan's notepad left behind near the loading dock. Doug handed it to him with a shrug. Didn't read it. Thought it looked important. "Thanks," Evan muttered, tucking it into his jacket. His hands didn't stop shaking for 5 minutes. Upstairs, Sienna entered the executive lounge for her 9:30 team briefing, but her steps faltered when she saw a little girl seated near the window swinging her legs off a velvet chair and coloring with a purple crayon. A receptionist hovered nearby, nervously tapping her tablet. "I'm so sorry, Ms. Calvert," the woman stammered. "Mr. Marlowe's daughter. Her school had an emergency closure. He didn't want to leave her alone." He promised to keep her out of the way. Sienna raised a hand. "It's all right. What's her name, Maisie?" The girl looked up, grinning. Her hair was pulled into a slightly crooked ponytail, her sneakers mismatched in color but not in confidence. "You're the CEO lady, right?" Maisie said, unfazed. Sienna arched a brow. "I suppose I am. You don't look as scary as Daddy said." Sienna nearly choked. "Is that so?" Maisie nodded solemnly. "He said you look like someone who doesn't believe in sleep or second chances." The receptionist gasped. Sienna laughed. "Genuinely?" Maisie's eyes lit up. "See, you should laugh more. Your face gets prettier when you do." And just like that, something unspoken broke inside Sienna, a little crack in the wall she had built so carefully. She knelt down, resting one hand on the back of Maisie's chair. "What are you drawing?" "It's a house. But not a real one. A safe one." Sienna paused. Safe from what Maisie looked her straight in the eye. From people who smile when they're lying. Sienna didn't speak after that. She simply stood, took one last glance at the drawing, and walked out. Back in her office, she unlocked her personal device and began combing through the internal contract archive. As she filtered search terms, her fingers hesitated. The file history on Clause 7.3 wasn't listed in the main logs. It had been routed through an old archive tag mislabeled as a compliance memo. Only someone with elevated clearance and a deep knowledge of the system could have done that. She called legal. Get me the metadata logs on any changes made to the draft merger agreement in the last 90 days. Full trace. Understood, Miss Calvert. May take a few hours. Good. Do it quietly. She ended the call and stared at the screen. Then, without meaning to, she opened her voice notes app, and there it was. The recording from the night she dictated her thoughts on the merger. Her voice echoed through the speakers. If this backfires, it's on me. I can't keep pretending I see everything just because I'm not allowed to blink. She didn't even remember saying that. But the truth of it hit hard. Later that day, Evan passed by the main printer room, a place he normally avoided. But this time, something caught his eye, a page left in the output tray, half sticking out. Curious, he pulled it out. It was a draft memo. From Graham Voss. Subject, Transition Protocol. Post-merger voting realignment. His stomach dropped. The language was subtle, but the implications were clear transfer of voting blocks to a holding trust in exchange for oversight coordination. It was corporate sleight of hand. He slid the paper into his notebook, and then he did something he hadn't done in years. He wrote an email. To S. Calvert, subject. Read the things we pretend not to see. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect trust. But I think you're starting to see it now. They've buried it deep, but it's there. Look at the metadata tags. Look at who accessed the compliance shell. Don't blink. E.M. Sienna read the email that night. She didn't respond, but she didn't delete it either. Instead, she sat in her office with the lights off, watching the city blink around her. One floor below, Evan mopped the marble floors, unaware that just above him he'd reignited a fire she thought long dead. And in a small corner of the lobby, Maisie sat cross-legged on the floor, coloring a new picture. This one was simpler, 3 stick figures holding hands. One tall, one medium, one tiny. In the corner of the page, she wrote in blocky, uneven letters, "Truth is what makes a place safe." And across the building in very different rooms, 2 adults, each broken in their own way, felt something stir. Not certainty, not yet, but something close. By the time the sun dipped behind the skyline, Manhattan looked like a cathedral of steel and silence. Sienna Calvert stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of her private office, arms folded, shoulders squared, but something beneath her skin was shifting. The kind of shift you don't feel until a truth you've buried begins to breathe again. Behind her, her tablet buzzed with updates, legal files, board reminders, a curated news alert about the merger. But she ignored them all, because in her hand was a printed email. From E.M. subject, don't blink. It wasn't the words that unsettled her. It was the tone. Not angry, not desperate, just unwavering. The way someone speaks when they've already made peace with the cost of being honest. She turned slowly and picked up the phone. Get Evan Marlowe to the 42nd floor. Now. Evan entered 10 minutes later, still in his janitor's uniform, the scent of bleach faint on his sleeves. But his presence felt different tonight, like someone who'd stopped hiding in plain sight. Sienna didn't stand. Take a seat, she said, motioning to the chair across from her desk. He sat. No hesitation. I read your email, she began. Then I had IT pull the metadata logs, just like you said. She slid a file toward him. Graham's name appears 3 times. Once on the compliance archive, once when the clause was renamed, and once last week editing permissions. Evan glanced at the file but didn't touch it. You already knew, didn't you? She asked quietly. I didn't know, Evan said, but I've learned to recognize the smell of rot, even when it's under gold leaf. Sienna exhaled, pressing her fingertips to her temple. I built this company from nothing, she whispered. Every deal, every partnership. All of it forged out of fear that if I didn't stay 10 steps ahead, someone would rip it from me. Evan's voice was low, and now the threat's not coming from outside. It's coming from the man standing next to you. She looked up at him. I need to stop this, she said, but I can't make a move unless I have solid ground. The board already thinks I'm too paranoid. Evan leaned forward. Then, let me help you. Silence stretched between them. She studied him. You want to trade your mop for a badge and a laptop. He gave a dry smile. Let's just say, I'd rather clean up numbers than coffee stains. Sienna paused. I can authorize a temporary consultancy role. Quietly, you'll have access to what you need. But if this leaks, if Graham finds out you and I both go down. Evan nodded once. I've already been down. This time, I'll bring a flashlight. She almost smiled. Almost. Later that night, Evan sat at the kitchen table of his small apartment, an old laptop glowing in the dark. Maisie was asleep in the next room, her tiny socks tossed on the hallway floor like breadcrumbs. He scrolled through archived financial reports, merger statements, and subsidiary breakdowns, fingers moving fast, brain sharper than it had been in years. His phone buzzed. Message from unknown. They'll come for you next. He stared at the screen, unfazed, then deleted it. Truth had always been dangerous, but silence was fatal. The next morning, Sienna stepped into the boardroom to meet with the legal committee. Graham was already seated, sipping black coffee sleeves rolled with performative ease. He stood when she walked in. You look rested, he said. Looks can lie, she replied. Their eyes locked. There was something colder behind Graham's gaze now. A flicker of calculation like he was weighing how much she already knew. Sienna kept her tone measured. I've decided to bring in an independent consultant. Quiet audit, just a sanity check before final signatures. Graham's smile twitched. Paranoia doesn't suit you. Neither does betrayal, she said, and took her seat. That afternoon, Evan, now dressed in simple slacks and a button-down, was granted limited access to the Calvert Digital Vault. As he entered the password for the secure drive, he muttered under his breath, Let's see what ghosts still live in this machine. He scrolled through spreadsheets, redacted memos, time-stamped approvals, and then he found it. A single Excel file dated 6 months prior buried under a folder labeled Deferred Liabilities. The file detailed a transfer of equity rights to a shell company in the Cayman Islands timed perfectly with the proposed merger date, and the listed trustee, Graham Voss. Back at home that evening, Maisie climbed into Evan's lap, clutching her favorite bedtime book. She looked up at him with wide, serious eyes. Are you working for the nice lady? Now, she asked. Evan brushed her hair back gently. Just for a little while. Is she going to be okay? He hesitated. I don't know yet. She's smart. But even smart people get trapped when they trust the wrong hands. Maisie laid her head against his chest. Then maybe she needs someone who tells the truth even when it hurts. Evan held her a little tighter. She does, he whispered. We all do. And in the city of bright lights and quiet betrayals, two people sat in separate rooms, one piecing together evidence, the other piecing together trust. They didn't know yet that the storm was about to break wide open, but they both knew one thing for sure. Truth doesn't whisper forever. Sooner or later, it knocks. The elevator hummed as it descended, but inside Evan Marlowe felt a weight heavier than gravity. Tucked inside his bag was a printed copy of the Cayman Trust documents, cold, undeniable proof that Graham Voss had engineered the silent transfer of power. It was all there, equity percentages, offshore routing codes, and a trustee signature that would haunt the company's future if left unchallenged. And yet Evan didn't feel triumphant. He felt exposed. Because the moment you hold the truth, you become its target. Upstairs, Sienna Calvert stood in front of the mirror in the private washroom adjoining her office. Her reflection stared back unreadable. She'd always believed strength meant never flinching. But lately the lines around her eyes told a different story. Behind her, the soft buzz of her phone vibrated on the marble counter. She glanced at the screen, incoming call Graham Voss. She let it ring. Because right now she didn't need more words. She needed facts. And Evan was about to bring them. 20 minutes later in her office with the door locked and blinds drawn, Evan laid the printed documents on her desk. Sienna scanned the pages silently. Her eyes didn't widen. Her lips didn't part. But the stillness in her face that was louder than any gasp. When she finished, she looked up. "Why the Cayman Islands?" she asked almost rhetorically. "Because sunlight doesn't reach there," Evan said. "Not the kind that matters." She tapped her fingers on the desk. "Did you make copies?" "Yes. But I didn't email them. Flash drive only. I've been down this road before." Sienna nodded slowly, then asked the question she hadn't dared to ask aloud until now. "Why are you helping me?" Evan met her eyes. "Because I've seen what happens when no one does." She didn't reply immediately. Then, very quietly, she said, "There's something cruel about betrayal. It never comes from your enemies." That silence between them was heavy, personal, deep-rooted, and Evan for the first time saw not just a CEO fighting for her company, but a woman who had spent years building walls just to survive. Later that afternoon in the bustling cafeteria of Calvert Equities, Graham stood sipping espresso from a sleek ceramic cup, eyes darting across the room like a chess player scanning a board. His phone buzzed. A message, no name, no greeting, just one sentence. "She knows." Graham didn't blink. He set the cup down and adjusted his cufflinks. It was time to pivot. That evening, as the office floor emptied, Sienna reviewed security footage from 6 months ago. She had requested everything related to the compliance archive folder, time-stamped access logs, login metadata, physical entry records. And there it was. A grainy clip of Graham entering the finance conference room after hours plugging in a USB drive and overriding folder permissions. He wasn't even trying to hide it. Sienna leaned back in her chair. "He thought I'd never look this far back," she whispered. Just then, her intercom crackled. "Ms. Calvert," her assistant's voice came through. "Mr. Voss is here. He says it's urgent." Sienna's eyes narrowed. "Send him in." Graham entered like he owned the oxygen in the room. "Sienna," he said too casually, "I wanted to check in before tomorrow's press round." She motioned toward the seat opposite her desk. "Have a seat, Graham." He didn't. Instead, he stood near the window staring out over the city like a man reviewing his kingdom. "You've been distant lately," he said, keeping his back to her. "Almost like you're preparing for a fight that doesn't exist." Sienna remained silent. He turned slowly. "You know, partnerships are built on trust." Sienna looked straight at him. So is betrayal. A flicker, barely there, but she saw it. His mask slipped just for a heartbeat. "What are you accusing me of?" he asked, voice low now. Sienna reached into her drawer and pulled out a folder, not the originals, but a copy. She slid it toward him. Graham glanced at it. Didn't touch it. "You've been busy," he said. She leaned forward. "I know everything, Graham. The shell company. The trustee's signature. The metadata trail. I even have footage of you plugging in the drive." His jaw tightened. "You think this wins you something?" She stood. "It wins me my company back." Graham laughed. Not the charming kind, the kind a man uses when he knows he's lost something but still wants to burn the house down. "You really believe the board will side with the janitor over me?" "He's not a janitor," she said. "He's a man who didn't blink when the truth was inconvenient." Graham stepped closer. "You don't want to start a war, Sienna. You won't survive it." She held his stare. "I've survived worse, and this time I'm not fighting alone." He stood there for a moment, then turned and walked out without another word. Downstairs, Evan sat on a bench in the lobby watching Maisie finish a juice box. "You're quiet," she said, wiping her mouth with her sleeve. just thinking." Maisie leaned against him. "Did she believe you?" Evan smiled faintly. "I think she believed herself." Maisie tilted her head. "That's harder, huh?" "Much harder," he replied. And as the city lights flickered to life again, two battles prepared to unfold, one in a boardroom lined with power, and another in the hearts of two people who had finally stopped running from what they saw in the mirror. Because when truth shows you who someone really is, you either fight for it, or you let it drown. The morning of the board meeting arrived with a storm on the horizon. Not in the sky, but in the walls of Calvert Equity's, tension so thick it felt like the air itself was listening. Sienna Calvert stood in the hallway outside the boardroom staring at her reflection in the glass. Behind her, 12 of the most powerful voices in the company waited, some loyal, some silent, and some sharpening knives behind polished smiles. Her hand lingered on the doorknob. Inside her pocket was a flash drive. Inside her heart, a fire. Then the door opened and the room went quiet. Ms. Calvert, chairwoman, Renata Doyle, greeted, her tone neutral, crisp. "We're ready to begin." Sienna nodded and took her seat at the head of the table. Graham Voss was already there, seated at her right, flipping casually through the printed agenda, like this was any other quarterly check-in. It wasn't. "Before we proceed," Renata continued, "Mr. Voss has requested to open with a statement." Sienna didn't flinch. Graham stood, buttoned his jacket, and smiled at the room like a pastor preparing a sermon. "I'll keep this brief," he began, voice calm, charming, deadly. "Over the past few weeks, Ms. Calvert has voiced concerns about the integrity of our upcoming merger. While I understand her caution, I'm afraid her doubts have evolved into paranoia." Several board members shifted uncomfortably. She's acted without board approval, initiated an off-the-books audit, granted access to confidential systems to an unvetted outsider. All of this while preparing to sign the most important deal in our company's history. He turned slightly eyes cold but polite. "Out of concern for fiduciary responsibility, I move that we initiate a temporary vote of no confidence in Ms. Calvert's leadership, pending an internal investigation." A beat of stunned silence followed, then whispers, raised brows, side glances. Renata cleared her throat. "Ms. Calvert, do you have a response?" Sienna stood slowly. She didn't raise her voice, didn't flinch. She simply reached into her pocket, took out the flash drive, and plugged it into the conference screen. The room darkened slightly as the projector flickered to life. One file. Cayman, transfer, trustee, approval.pdf. Another. Footage from the security feed timestamped. Graham, late night, USB in hand. The room turned still. Sienna's voice sliced through the silence like cold steel. "What Mr. Voss calls paranoia, I call vigilance." She turned to the board. Clause 7. 3 was not a clerical oversight. It was planted deliberately so that if this merger closed, controlling interest in Calvert Equities would shift to an offshore trust under one name, Graham Voss. Gasps. Audible now. She pressed play on a clip of the audit trail. Access logs, email headers, all pointing back to Graham. He tried to interrupt. "Let's not dramatize." "Sit down," Renata said sharply. And Graham, his veneer cracking, did. Sienna stepped forward. "I didn't want to believe it at first. I thought maybe I'd been in the tower too long. Maybe I'd stopped seeing clearly. But then, someone with nothing to gain and everything to lose showed me the truth." She turned, locking eyes with the board. "And now, I'm showing it to you." The vote wasn't close. 9-3. Graham was suspended effective immediately. Legal would follow. But the damage wasn't just on paper, it was in the air. In the betrayal that lingered even as the room emptied. Sienna sat alone in the boardroom long after everyone had left. The screen had gone black, but her thoughts hadn't. Later that evening, Evan waited outside the building, Maisie's small hand wrapped around his finger. Sienna stepped out, coat draped over her arm, the storm clouds finally breaking overhead. "You were right," she said quietly, stopping beside him. "They never saw it coming." Evan nodded. Neither did he. She looked down at Maisie, who was scribbling something in her notebook with a red crayon. "What are you drawing now?" Sienna asked. Maisie didn't look up. "A shield," she said, "for people who get hurt trying to do the right thing." Sienna blinked, then crouched down beside her. "That's a very important drawing." Maisie nodded. "My dad says sometimes people like you forget you're allowed to be scared." Sienna swallowed. Evan gently placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "And sometimes people like me forget what it feels like to be seen." The three stood there for a moment, quiet rain beginning to patter softly around them. Then Sienna's straightened eyes fixed on Evan. "I want to make your role permanent," she said. "Not as a janitor, as a strategic analyst. Quiet off books, but with full access. You saw something none of us did. That matters." Evan exhaled. "You sure I don't exactly blend in?" She gave a tired smile. "Maybe I'm done hiring people who disappear when it gets hard." He nodded. "All right then." That night, in the quiet of his apartment, Evan tucked Maisie into bed and watched her drift into sleep. On the nightstand sat her red crayon shield, a crooked drawing that looked more like a heart wrapped in armor. He stared at it for a long time, then walked to his laptop, and began building the next firewall not with code or caution but with truth, because now he wasn't just cleaning up messes, he was protecting what mattered. And from the penthouse to the basement, something in Calvert Equities had shifted, because the janitor had spoken, and the company had listened. The next morning, sunlight poured through the tall windows of the Calvert Equities executive floor, but the air was far from warm. Evan Marlowe sat in a small corner office now marked Temporary Consultant, Strategic Risk, staring at a wall of documents. His old mop cart was gone, replaced by dual monitors, a sleek glass desk, and a security badge with his name finally spelled correctly. He didn't look comfortable. He looked alert. Because something about the way Graham had exited didn't sit right. That smile he wore as security escorted him out. It wasn't defeat. It was a delay. Across the floor, Sienna walked into her office and stopped. On her desk sat a black envelope. No return label. No handwriting. Her stomach tightened. She opened it. Inside was a USB drive and a folded note. "You think you've won. Let's ask the world what they think of your new janitor." No signature. No threat. But the implication was clear. Evan was halfway through cross-checking offshore account closures when his phone buzzed. "Sienna. Can you come to my office?" 2 minutes later, he stood in front of her desk as she handed him the drive. His jaw clenched as he recognized the exact model, same brand Graham used for the original clause transfer. "You think it's just a bluff?" she asked. Evan shook his head. "No, I think he's about to play his dirtiest card." He plugged the drive into his own laptop, isolated from the network, and waited. A video loaded almost instantly. Grainy, shaky, shot from a hidden angle in the break room. Evan, standing close to Sienna, talking, laughing. Then another clip, a tight shot of them in her private office heads close over documents. Then paused on a frame where Sienna reached out, touched Evan's wrist for a second. With no context, it looked intimate. Too intimate. Sienna sat back, her voice cold with rage. "He's going to spin this as a scandal," Evan finished. "Abuse of power. You hiring someone you had a relationship with. He knows there's nothing between us." Evan looked away, jaw set. But he also knows how fast a rumor travels when the truth walks. Within hours, an anonymous leak hit the business blogs. CEO caught in secret relationship with janitor-turned-consultant Sienna's phone exploded with notifications. Press inquiries, legal pings. A board member even texted her asking if she needed to step away temporarily for optics. She threw the phone on the couch. Evan stood at her office door. "We knew he'd hit back," he said. "I thought he'd go after me," she said bitterly. "Not you." Evan walked in slowly. He's not going after me. He's going after trust. She looked at him, something soft flickering behind her tired eyes. This company's been my whole identity for 20 years, she said. Every win, every loss, it's written into these walls. Then let's remind them what the truth sounds like. She raised an eyebrow. And what would that be? Evan stepped closer. His voice didn't rise, but the weight of it filled the room. It sounds like a woman who didn't flinch when power tried to rewrite her name, and a man who refused to stay silent just because the world told him to mop the floor and move on. Sienna didn't speak. Her eyes just closed for a moment. When they opened, they burned. The next morning, Sienna held a surprise press conference. No warning to the board, no filters, no spin doctors. She stood behind the podium, flanked by the Calvert Equity seal and a sea of microphones. I want to address the recent rumors, she began, steady as steel. Yes, I brought on a consultant with an unconventional background. Yes, he worked in our janitorial department. No, I do not have a personal relationship with him. She let the silence settle. But here's what I do have. She held up the original documents, the shell company filings, the Cayman transfer agreements, the falsified clause trail. I have proof that my second-in-command attempted to steal control of this company through backdoor deals and corporate deception. That's what my consultant uncovered, and for that he deserves your respect, not your suspicion. A reporter raised her hand. Why not just fire him quietly? Handle this internally, Sienna looked straight into the camera. Because truth handled quietly often dies quietly, and this one deserves to live. After the press conference, the office buzzed with a different kind of energy. Some whispers, some nods, and some people who for the first time looked Evan in the eye not with pity or judgment, but with respect. Maisie met him in the lobby after school. She ran to him, holding her tiny backpack in one hand and a folded note in the other. "What's this?" Evan asked. "I made you a certificate," she said proudly, "for doing the scariest job in the world." He unfolded it. It was hand-drawn in bright blue crayon, Truth Teller of the Year for being braver than most adults. Evan knelt down and hugged her tightly. "I don't know what I did to deserve you," he whispered. Maisie grinned. "You stopped lying to yourself." Upstairs, Sienna watched them through her window. Something shifted in her chest, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Hope, not for the company, for herself. Because for once, she hadn't outmaneuvered the crisis. She had faced it, and with the help of a man who'd once been invisible to the world, she'd reminded everyone that truth doesn't have to come in a tailored suit or an Ivy League resume. Sometimes it comes holding a mop and a flashlight, and sometimes it changes everything. The old iron gate creaked as Sienna stepped onto the overgrown property tucked into the far end of Terrytown. Ivy crawled up the stone walls like time trying to erase what was once a law office known for handling Calvert Equity's most discreet battles. Now it was just a cottage cloaked in silence. Evan waited by the sidewalk, one eye on the house, the other on Maisie, who was coloring quietly in the back seat of his truck. "You sure she's going to talk to you?" he asked as Sienna reached for the brass knocker. "I'm not," Sienna replied. "But if she doesn't, Graham wins." The door opened before her fist landed. Standing there was a woman in her 50s, tall silver hair twisted into a low knot and eyes that once cut through contracts like blades. Margot Levins, the former general counsel of Calvert Equities, and the one who vanished 2 years ago after a suspicious health-related retirement. Sienna met her gaze. "I need 15 minutes. Margot studied her like someone who'd spent a lifetime learning to distrust everyone in a suit, then stepped aside. Inside, the place smelled of old books and dried lavender. They sat across from each other in armchairs that had seen more settlements than courtrooms. "I thought I'd seen the last of Calvert when I walked out with my spine intact," Margot said flatly. "Why now?" Sienna took a deep breath. then laid the flash drive on the table. It's happening again. Only this time the parasite wears the face of a friend. Margot didn't touch the drive, just waited. Graham forged my signature, Sienna continued. He masked a clause that would hand control of the company to a shell entity he owns offshore. And now he's framed the whistleblower, a man who used to clean our floors for misconduct, to cover his tracks. Still, Margot said nothing, until Sienna added quietly, "He used your retirement clause to silence the audit trail, the same legal mechanism you helped design." That hit. Margot's fingers twitched slightly against her teacup. "I warned them," she murmured. "I told the board we were building a castle with no doors, only mirrors." Sienna leaned forward. "I'm not asking you to come back. I just need your word on the record to confirm the audit trail was tampered with using your original legal toolset." Margot looked down for a long moment, then said, "You don't need my word. You need a reckoning." She stood, walked over to an old filing cabinet and pulled out a locked folder sealed and stamped. Inside were handwritten notes, copies of internal memos, and a termination letter. Not hers, but drafted for her by Graham, dated months before she'd resigned. "He threatened to ruin my reputation if I didn't walk away quietly," Margot said. "So I did." She handed the folder to Sienna. "But I've regretted it every morning since." Sienna's voice broke. "You kept all this," Margot gave a half-smile. "A lawyer never throws away the truth. We just wait for the world to want it again." Back at the office, Evan reviewed the folder page by page, his fingers moving like a detective restoring a crime scene. This is everything he whispered. Memos, original templates, the email where Graham orders a junior staffer to make Calvert leaner at the top. That was about Margot. Sienna stood by the window staring out. Tomorrow, the annual shareholders' assembly will be broadcast live. The room will be stacked with investors who believe Graham is the golden child. "Then we give them gold," Evan said. "Truth shines brighter when it's been buried." She turned to him. "But they'll come for me. The press, the board, even the markets. I'll be the woman who let a janitor infiltrate the C-suite." Evan met her eyes. "Let them say what they want. You didn't let me in. You listened." Sienna's voice softened. "And if we fail," he gave a half-smile, "then at least we failed for something that mattered." A silence settled between them, thick, honest, heavy with mutual respect. Then a knock at the door. Maisie poked her head in. "Dad, can we go get tacos? My brain's tired from all the grown-up talking." Evan chuckled. "2 minutes, kiddo." She nodded, then turned to Sienna. "You should come too. Grown-ups need tacos when they're sad." Sienna blinked, then smiled. "You know what, Maisie? That might be the smartest thing I've heard all day." That night, in the dim booth of a local taco joint, the three sat together for the first time, not as CEO and janitor or whistleblower and witness, but as three people learning what trust feels like without conditions. Maisie bit into her taco, paused, then said, "You know, when someone lies, their eyes blink too fast. That's how I knew Mr. Graham was a fake." Evan laughed. "Is that right, Detective?" Sienna leaned in. "We should have hired you months ago." Maisie beamed, then grew thoughtful. "You're not scared anymore," she said to Sienna. The woman paused, surprised. "What makes you say that?" Maisie shrugged. "You stopped holding your arms so tight, and your eyes look like they can breathe now." Sienna felt a lump form in her throat. Out of the mouths of children. As they left, Sienna looked at Evan. "You were right. The truth needs a reckoning. And tomorrow it gets one." Evan nodded, quiet. But inside he knew what came next wasn't just a confrontation. It was the moment power met its reflection. And this time it would have to answer to more than just the market. It would have to answer to integrity. The ballroom of the Astoria Tower shimmered with crystal chandeliers and a tension that pulsed beneath the marble floor. It was the biggest event of the fiscal year, the Calvert Equities Annual Shareholder Assembly. More than 300 shareholders, analysts, and media professionals filled the room, their lanyards gleaming, their expressions alert. Giant LED screens displayed the company's logo over soft orchestral music. The air smelled of money power and carefully applied perfume. And in the center of it all, Graham Voss stood behind the podium, smiling like a man who had already won. "Good morning," he began, voice honeyed and steady. "In an ever-changing market, one thing must remain: constant leadership that knows when to evolve." Applause echoed around the room, though some hands clapped with less conviction. "Today, I'm proud to present the final terms of our merger with Global Nexus, a move that positions Calvert as a global titan, leaner, faster, smarter." Behind him, slides clicked through projections of growth synergy and strategic alignment. And then he smiled wider. "You'll note that the revised governance model includes a simplified oversight structure. Efficient, secure." He paused, and no longer encumbered by old frameworks that slowed our growth. A few board members exchanged glances. Graham continued, "This company deserves bold moves. I intend to deliver." At the back of the room, Evan Marlowe stood near a catering station, his suit plain but pressed. Sienna Calvert sat 3 rows from the front, her back straight, her eyes unwavering. Beside Evan, Margot Levins stood silently, her presence ghost-like. Until now, no one even knew she'd returned. Evan glanced down at his phone. 9:46 a.m. Showtime. Graham was about to introduce the merger approval vote when the house lights dimmed unexpectedly. The LED screen behind him flickered. Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. Then a video began to play. Grainy security footage. Date stamped. Office hallway. Graham, late at night. Entering Sienna's private office with a USB. Another clip. Him printing documents. One in particular, the forged Clause 7.3 transfer form. Gasps spread like wildfire. "No," Graham stammered, turning toward the tech crew. "Stop this. This is unauthorized." A new voice cut through the room. Calm, cold, familiar. A single signature. "That's all I need. And Calvert will be mine by the end of the quarter." It was Graham's voice. Clear. Undeniable. The room erupted. Shareholders stood. Phones filmed. Board members muttered in shock. From the center aisle, Sienna stood. "This footage is real," she said. "And the voice you just heard was recorded 6 weeks ago." Without his knowledge. Graham turned white. "You have no idea what you're doing," he growled. Sienna walked slowly to the podium. "I know exactly what I'm doing," she said. "I'm protecting 40 years of legacy from being swallowed by greed disguised as progress." Security began moving toward Graham. He backed away. "This is character assassination," he barked. "She's desperate, using footage without context." "Then, let's add context." All eyes turned. It was Evan stepping forward, holding a document in one hand. "Original signature analysis," he said. "We had it independently verified. The clause transfer document contains a forged version of Sienna Calvert's signature copied from a dated employment contract and altered digitally." He handed the report to the lead board member. Signed by a certified forensic analyst. The room was dead silent. Until one voice spoke. Renata Doyle, the chairwoman, stood slowly. "I move to suspend Graham Voss from all leadership duties, effective immediately pending a full investigation." No one objected. Graham was escorted out, his face twisted in a mixture of disbelief and fury, his empire of manipulation crumbling with every step. Outside, media swarmed the exits. But Sienna didn't stop. She walked straight through them, flanked by Evan and Margot, and didn't speak until they were well down the avenue, the sun warm against her face. She exhaled slowly. "It's done." "No," Margot corrected softly. "It's only beginning." Sienna looked at Evan. "Thank you." He shook his head. "I just pushed open a door that was already cracking." She smiled. "You held it open when it started closing again." That's the difference. They stopped at a crosswalk. Evan looked up at the sky, then at her. I'm not a hero. Sienna shrugged. Neither am I. But maybe we're done waiting for perfect heroes to save us. Later that evening, Evan returned home to find Maisie on the porch, barefoot, arms crossed. You're late, she said sternly. Again. He grinned. Big day. She nodded. You saved the company. He knelt beside her. No, but I helped someone brave save it herself. Maisie unwrapped something from behind her back, a handmade sign scrawled in red crayon. It read, For truth, people only. She taped it on the door. You're one of them now, she said. Evan blinked, then pulled her into a hug that said more than any boardroom speech ever could. And across the city in a high-rise office where power had once lived behind cold glass and cold hearts, the truth had found a voice. And this time, it stayed. The Calvert Equities building felt different in the days that followed. The security guard smiled more. The receptionist laughed again. And the echo in the marble atrium no longer felt like a silence pressed down by secrets. It felt like space clearing itself for something new. Sienna walked through the lobby slowly, coffee in hand, her heels softer than usual against the floor. She paused in front of the glass wall that looked out over the city and let herself breathe for the first time in what felt like years. She hadn't worn black today. Instead, a navy blue blouse. Simple, elegant, human. Behind her footsteps approached. Strange, seeing you without the board breathing down your neck, Evan said, stepping beside her with that familiar quiet presence that didn't demand space. It earned it. She smiled without turning. They're still breathing, she replied, just not fire. There was a pause before she asked, You heading to the new office? Evan nodded. Margot's already camped in, said I get the desk by the leaky window. Sienna chuckled. Fits you. He turned to face her more fully. You know, I never meant for any of this to happen. She looked at him now. What do you mean I didn't come here to fix anyone's legacy? I was trying to keep my daughter's lunch warm and maybe afford her a new pair of sneakers. That was the size of my ambition. Sienna's eyes softened. But you didn't just uncover the rot. You stayed when the storm came. That's not small, Evan. He shrugged. You stayed too. There was a silence between them, not awkward but deep. Like two people standing on the same cliff knowing they'd both nearly fallen. Later that afternoon, Sienna invited Evan and Maisie to her home, a modest brownstone nestled between rows of sycamores. Not the fortress of a CEO, but a home that once had been filled with warmth before ambition built its walls. Maisie wandered through the garden like she'd found Narnia. Evan stood in the kitchen watching as Sienna poured lemonade with surprising ease. You ever take a break? He asked. She smiled faintly. Once. I read half a novel in college. Did it have a happy ending? No, but it had an honest one. They sat on the back porch watching Maisie try to coax a squirrel out of a tree with bits of granola. Sienna sipped her drink, then said quietly, My father used to sit out here when he was tired of being a lion. Evan turned to her. What was he like? She looked into the past a long moment before replying. Brilliant, demanding, always 5 steps ahead. But he thought rest was weakness. He taught me to move forward or be devoured. Evan nodded. Sounds familiar. Except my dad just disappeared when I was 7, left behind an empty toolbox and a lifetime of questions. She looked at him, and yet somehow we both survived. He smiled. Barely. Inside, Maisie found a small photo of Sienna and her father tucked behind a dusty award on a bookshelf. She brought it to the porch. Is this your dad? She asked. Sienna took the frame and nodded. Yeah, that's him. Maisie studied the photo, then looked up. He looked serious. He was. Maisie wrinkled her nose. My dad gets serious too. Usually when the rent is due or I say something smart and he doesn't know what to say back. They all laughed. Then Maisie added, "But I think serious people need hugs more than silly ones." And just like that, she wrapped her arms around Sienna's waist. Sienna froze just a second, then slowly lowered her hand to the little girl's back. Her eyes shimmered. Evan watched the moment quietly, and in it he saw something unravel. Not undone, but softened, like concrete finally learning how to let rain soak through. That evening, before they left, Sienna walked Evan out. The porch light flickered once. She made a mental note to fix it. He turned to her just before stepping off the stairs. "I won't take the permanent position." She looked surprised. "Why, I came here to mop floors. I stayed to fight for truth. But I don't want to become part of another machine, Sienna. I know myself. I start chasing safety again. I'll forget why I ever spoke up in the first place." She looked down, then nodded. "But if I ever needed a voice like yours again, I'll be there," he said. "Not for the title, for the truth." She smiled sadly. "You know what scares me most?" He waited. "That I spent 2 decades building walls and it took a janitor and his daughter to show me how to open a window." Evan tilted his head. "Then maybe leave it open this time." Back home, Evan tucked Maisie into bed. She held the little framed photo Sienna had given her, a photo of Sienna as a child standing next to her father, both of them stiff and awkward. "She was little once, too," Maisie whispered. Evan nodded. Everyone was. Maisie looked at him seriously. "Do you think grown-ups forget that?" "Sometimes," he said, "but the best ones remember just in time." She smiled sleepily. "I think she's one of the best ones." Evan kissed her forehead. "So do I." The city pulsed outside their window, honking horns, laughter from a nearby bar, a street musician playing a broken saxophone. Evan stood by the window staring out. He had nothing but his name, a daughter, and a few hard-earned truths, but tonight it felt like enough. And in the distance, in a brownstone with flickering porch lights and a newly opened window, Sienna sat at her desk writing something in a notebook she hadn't touched in years. It wasn't a report or a strategy. It was just 3 lines. "Truth doesn't walk in with credentials. It knocks quietly, mop in hand, and it leaves only if we stop listening." She closed the notebook and smiled. It was time to listen more. A soft spring rain had begun to fall, one of those gentle whispering rains that made everything seem quieter, as if the city itself was finally exhaling. Evan Marlowe zipped up Maisie's little yellow raincoat, pulling the hood over her messy curls. "You ready, sunshine?" She nodded, gripping her stuffed turtle with both hands. Outside, Sienna stood beneath the awning of the small cafe near the park, holding 3 hot chocolates in a cardboard tray. She wore a simple gray coat and boots that were clearly not made for puddles. But she didn't seem to mind. Evan and Maisie joined her, and the 3 began walking down the cobbled path that wound through Marlowe Park, the same park where Sienna's father once used to sit in silent contemplation. Now it held echoes of different stories. Maisie ran ahead, jumping into puddles with dramatic flair. She spun around, arms out like airplane wings, laughing up at the sky. "She doesn't walk. She lives out loud," Sienna said, watching her with a smile that had learned how to soften over time. Evan sipped his drink. "She reminds me that joy isn't a reward, it's a right." They walked in silence for a few steps, the kind of silence that holds no tension, only understanding. Then Sienna glanced at him. "You could have disappeared, you know, after all of it. No one would have blamed you." He nodded slowly. "I thought about it. What stopped you?" He gave a half-smile. "Maisie asked me if I liked who I became." Sienna raised a brow. "And did you—" "I didn't answer her," he said. "But then I saw her draw a picture of me, standing tall, not hiding, and I realized I'd better start trying." Sienna took a breath and said something she hadn't dared say before. "I'm sorry, Evan." He stopped. "For what?" "For every time I saw you and didn't really see you, for thinking you were less than because of a badge or a title. You reminded me what power should look like." Evan looked at her gently. It's never been about me. He gestured toward Maisie. It's always been about the world we leave them. They reached a wooden bench beneath a willow tree, its long green fronds dancing in the breeze. Maisie climbed onto the bench like a throne and declared, "This is the court of big feelings." Evan chuckled. "And who's the judge I am?" she said, serious. "And I say you both are guilty of being brave." Sienna laughed, sitting beside her. "Well, what's the sentence?" Maisie leaned in. "You have to promise never to stop being honest, even when it's hard." Evan and Sienna exchanged a look. "I can live with that," Evan said. Sienna nodded. "So can I." Maisie beamed, then jumped down and wandered toward the duck pond nearby, humming to herself. Evan watched her for a beat, then turned to Sienna. "Do you ever wonder what's next every day?" And she shrugged. "For the first time, I'm okay not having an answer. I used to think control was safety. Now I think truth is." He glanced at her hands. She was holding something. "You writing again?" Sienna opened her palm and showed him a small notebook. "I never stopped. I just wrote in the margins of business reports." She flipped it open and read aloud. "We build empires of numbers, but forget to measure integrity. Until someone sweeps the dust, and we remember what floors were made for." Evan looked at her quiet. "That's good," he said. Sienna closed the notebook. "I think I'll call it Margins." He smiled. "I'd read that." They sat in stillness again, the kind that only two people with nothing left to hide can share. As the rain softened, a faint rainbow began to stretch faintly across the horizon, blurred but beautiful. Maisie came running back wet, wild breathless. "Look," she pointed, "the sky's smiling." Evan scooped her up, hugging her close. "I think it is." Sienna reached out and touched Maisie's cheek. "You're the bravest person I've met." "You know that," Maisie wrinkled her nose. "I'm just a kid." "Exactly," Sienna said softly. "And you reminded me that being a kid is not about age. It's about hope." Evan whispered, "And hope is how everything begins again." As they walked back through the park, the path glistening beneath their feet, Sienna paused at a wooden sign planted in the grass. It read, "Integrity is messy, but it's still worth it. Anonymous." She turned to Evan. "You ever see this before?" He shrugged. "Might have been an accident. Or maybe someone wanted to leave something honest behind." She smiled, eyes misty. "I'm glad you didn't stay invisible, Evan." He looked at her, this woman who had once hidden behind spreadsheets and steel. "I'm glad you finally looked." And together, one janitor, one CEO, and one little girl with a bright yellow coat, they walked the long path home. Not back to what was, but forward to what could be. And in the hush of that fading afternoon, with truth laid bare and trust rebuilt, the story ended not with triumph or perfection, but with something better, peace, and the quiet promise of a new beginning. Sometimes the people who change our lives forever don't arrive with a title or a grand entrance. They show up quietly, holding nothing but honesty, love, and a reason to speak up. And when they do, the world shifts, just enough to let the light back in. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country or city in the comments. I read every single one. And tell me, what was the most powerful moment in today's story that stayed with you? If this story touched your heart, consider subscribing to our channel. We share stories like this every day about love, truth, second chances, and the quiet strength in all of us. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story that might just change your day or your life. Thank you for spending your precious time with us. Until next time, take care, stay kind, and keep believing in the good.